that the absurd is true and the obvious is false. It may sound like an impossible feat, but the editors and marketers know that people will buy anything as long as you package it right. Religious architecture is a soaring monument to this truth. I'm not naive about these things. I know that book and magazine publishers aren't in the business of enlightenment. They're in the business of selling books and magazines, not truth. And they know that seekers will gladly pay to be reassured that, common sense aside, they can wake up without quitting the dream. Such is the state of spiritual publishing today, of spirituality today, and ultimately it's all because ego will do anything to survive. I spend a lot of time in front of the shelves in new and used bookstores, surfing the web, thumbing through magazines, always looking for someone who says things well, who can talk about the state of being enlightened, and, more interestingly, the process of getting there. Of course, when the subject is enlightenment, you're pretty much confined to saying what it's not, because there's no saying what it is. For every few hundred publications that claim to have something valid to say on the subject, perhaps one does. And for every few hundred spiritual leaders shepherding their adoring flocks ever higher up the mountain, perhaps one will be driving them over the edge and into reality. That's not to say that all spiritual leaders are unenlightened. Following the same irrational impulse that drives me to try to express what I know, an awakened person might, on rare occasion, become a spiritual leader. But when they do, it's never to enlightenment that they lead. How do I know? I know that no spiritual teacher leads to enlightenment because there is no leading to enlightenment. There is no teaching of enlightenment. Hence, the inevitable outcome we see all around us. Everyone's grooving on the gurus, and everyone's getting more and more spiritual, but nobody's waking up. When it comes to the teachingless teachings, you have to take your business to Zen and Advaita, being careful to avoid the tourist traps where you can unwittingly walk in circles for years or lifetimes. For instance, Ramana Maharishi prescribed the use of the inquiry, "Who am I?" to be used relentlessly as an auger for drilling down through all the layers of ego and delusion. But this process of self-inquiry has itself become mired in layers of ego and delusion, repackaged for mass consumption. Ramana's students have become teachers, and their students have become teachers, and the diamond at the core, the process of self-inquiry, has become the cheese in a dozen bait-and-switch operations. Those lured in by the simplicity and directness of self-inquiry are sucked into a morass of teachers and teachings, gurus and babble, ego and delusion, from which they are not likely to soon emerge. 5 words. Ask yourself, who am I? 5 words that render all other words, including those of Ramana Maharishi, superfluous. 5 words that need no explanation, no amplification, no elucidation. 5 words that grant self-reliance and self-determination. But a complete spiritual teaching that fits on a matchbook cover is not what anyone really wants. Self-reliance is not what anyone really wants. By what mechanism does such a simple thing as self-inquiry get mangled and bloated beyond all recognition? Ego. Always ego. The fundamental conflict in the spiritual quest is that ego desires spiritual enlightenment. But ego can never achieve spiritual enlightenment. Self cannot achieve no self. That's why anyone who wants to sell enlightenment must first reduce it to more manageable proportions, to something ego can achieve. Enlightenment light. Less filling, tastes great. Enlightenment. The fundamental conflict can only be resolved by altering the equation. Yes, it's cheating, but everyone's okay with it. Spiritual enlightenment gets redefined as something attainable by ego, and now the equation works to everyone's satisfaction. Ego gets to continue the noble quest, and a thriving spiritual industry continues to thrive. Of course, no one gets the Grail, but if you understand the fundamental conflict, you'll see that no one really wanted it anyway. The quest for the Grail is about the quest, not the Grail. Listen, here's all you need to know to become enlightened. Sit down, shut up, and ask yourself what's true until you know. That's it. That's the whole deal. A complete teaching of enlightenment, a complete practice. If you ever have any questions or problems, no matter what the question or problem is, the answer is always exactly the same. Sit down, shut up, and ask yourself what's true until you know. In other words, go jump off a cliff. Don't go near the cliff and contemplate jumping off. Don't read a book about jumping off. Don't study the art and science of jumping off. Don't join a support group for jumping off. Don't write poems about jumping off. Don't suck up to someone else who jumped off. Just jump. I returned to Julie's question about the magazine's In the World, but not of the world cover. It means what we talked about, I answer her. It means that you're playing your role on the stage, but you don't confuse your role with yourself or the stage with reality. It means you know that you're playing a character in a staged production. To switch analogies, it's like lucid dreaming. You achieve normal waking consciousness within the dream so that you're in the dream but not of the dream. I doubt that's what they'll say in the magazine, she says. Doesn't matter, I reply. There's no benefit to understanding it. It's something you're familiar with because it's your reality, or you're not because it isn't. I thumb through the magazine and see ad after ad peddling books and teachers and products and a pornographic mockery of man's desire to know the truth. Moneylenders in the temple. What would they say it's about in your magazine? I asked Julie. How to be a householder and a recluse at the same time? But that's not possible, is it? If you mean, can you get a deal on enlightenment? Can you be awake without having to wake up? The answer is no. If you mean, can you live a spiritual, compassionate life and still raise kids and have a house and a stock portfolio and a demanding career and all that, I assume the answer is yes. But it's really not my thing. Our code name, Beatrice, is called, meaning our sandwiches are ready. What do you think of people? Asked Julie. I'm a little surprised by her question, and I just stare at her open-mouthed. You don't have to answer now, she says. Just think about it, and maybe we can talk about it while we eat. Okay. There's no seating in the co-op, so I grab an extra plastic bag at the checkout, and we sit at a picnic table nearby using the bags to keep our butts dry. I have ordered a roast beef sandwich that caused Julie to look at me somewhat askance, surprised, I suppose, that I'm a carnivore. The trees are dripping on us a little, but we don't seem to mind. I see people the same way vampires do. End of Disc 4.